It's a beautiful thing, a track. A simple oval, correctly, precisely measured, leads to all kinds of confidence building. This is an absolutely beautiful thing. It's a high school track. There's thousands of them throughout the world. There's no fancy Mondo springy surface designed for breaking records. It's just gravel, sod, grass, and the magic is simply that it's precisely measured. 400 meters, and so every time you beep your little watch, you have a sense of certainty. A sense of certainty that's not available in macroeconomics or international relations, much as people try to quantify those things. But this aspect of life can be quantified.
An ordinary high school track. Today, the workout is Prefontaine 200s, often abbreviated simply as Pre-200s. Developed by the legendary coach and Nike co-founder Bill Bowerman, and named after his most legendary pupil at the University of Oregon, Steve Prefontaine. It's an elegant, simple set of intervals. 200 meters, very hard, somewhere between mile and 5K race pace. Then 200 meters of floating, but not easy effort, a bit slower than marathon race pace. Just alternating efforts of 200 meters. The instruction is to literally keep going until you don't feel good. If either the hard or easy intervals start dropping more than a few seconds off target pace, the workout is over. The magic of this session is its counterintuitive physiological objective. It aims to improve lactate threshold, that is to say, the limit of your body's ability to process muscular metabolic waste. But you're never running at your actual lactate threshold, which is often defined, rule of thumb, as the speed you can sustain for an hour. Instead, you're stimulating the so-called lactate shuttle mechanism. The fast 200s flood your muscles with lactic acid. As you briefly back off, your body learns to redistribute it more efficiently. This invigorating yo-yoing produces similar gains to simply locking into a moderately hard pace and hanging on for dear life. And for me, it's often a lot more fun. Rather than go run 8 kilometers at this exact pace, it's just keep up this back and forth until you're not feeling it anymore. Recently, reading a coffee table book about Nike's history, I encountered an intriguing fact about the great Eliud Kipchoge's first attempt to break the 2-hour marathon barrier. Coverage of that Breaking 2 attempt often emphasized the Nike Sport Research Lab and its engineering precision. The science is impressive, but apparently, the lab data gathered on Kipchoge was a bit useless. Why? Well, he detests running on treadmills. As do I. Since tests of maximal aerobic capacity or lactate threshold usually involve an athlete hooked up to instruments, going as hard as he can go on a treadmill, a strong personal distaste for that experience will produce data that underestimates actual fitness. Like a lot of us, it seems, the greatest marathoner of all time also finds it hard to summon greatness on the treadmill. In his book, Do Hard Things, the former elite runner and performance expert Steve Magnus tells a similar tale to illustrate the value of choice in reaching peak effort. A standard lab test involves increasing speed or incline on a treadmill until you basically fall off, Steve didn't like this. It felt foreboding rather than electrifying. So he performed the test a different way. He simply gave himself 10 minutes of running to exhaustion, in which he could choose when and how he would empty his tank. Tested this way, his aerobic capacity was much higher. He reproduced this flexible test years later with his own collegiate athletes, and found an arresting nuance. The best athletes on his team thrived with the open-ended protocol, while the others did better with the hit this pace or else protocol. Excellent athletes, especially, seemed motivated more by exploring their limits than by needing to maintain a standard. Agency, self-determination, self-legislation, freedom. From the origins of liberal democratic theory in the Enlightenment, a whole vocabulary around the goodness of choice emerges. It can be troubling and counterproductive that so much public debate about public goods seems to generate goals that are really just rigid totems. This percentage of GDP, that many new people hired, 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. To be clear, it's not that these are incorrect goals. But I wonder if citizens, not to mention policymakers, can be maximally enthused when they are told to hit this exact pace or else fall off the treadmill. Would we be better off simply working hard at varying and self-selected efforts? In a Nike video series called What Are You Working On?, Eliud Kipchoge described his efforts at environmental conservation. His motivation to preserve hundreds of acres of woodland around his Kenyan training camp seems more visceral than doctrinal. He described training on his regular trails and imagining a so-called negative forest, a place where trees are gone, pollution is rife, there is nowhere to run. And avoiding that seems both necessary and achievable. It's a reasonable decision about the scale of activism. There are places in the world where even a little park-like space, like this ordinary high school track, can't be taken for granted. You could choose the other end of the spectrum, the vast macro scale. A former chair of the White House Economic Council recently called for a green Marshall Plan, echoing President Truman's massive post-war spending that sought to rebuild Europe and keep it out of the Soviet orbit. We might consider massive technology transfer and clean energy funding, tying together friendly nations in a low-carbon trade network, a noble confluence of climate and geopolitical goals. And somewhere between local forests and a new Cold War is the Inflation Reduction Act or the European Green Deal. Unfathomably intricate policies of subsidy and tax nudges, all valid scales of action. Notice that none of these aim directly, or even can aim directly, at 1.5 degrees of warming. None of them are simple rules like disinvest. They are not singular paces to maintain. They are modulations. In theory, a universal carbon tax would be much simpler, but at present, voters are fairly certain they just don't like that. So you adjust for weather patterns. In a pre-200s workout, the perfectly symmetric format allows me to always run the fast intervals on the same side of the track, and I always go with the tailwind. I exercise choice and discretion in how to work. The work is still getting done. The irony of pre-200s is that their namesake, Steve Prefontaine, had an iconically reckless style of racing. He would take the lead and just rip it until he faltered. Due to his talent, he could often keep it together until he broke the tape. Not a balanced release of energy, pedal to the floor. In key races, this sometimes served him poorly. Today, I'm definitely stretching the legs. There's a pure exhilaration in hitting top gear. I'm building bodily resilience to adverse chemistry. But I'm not burying myself in the mental exhaustion of monomaniacal focus. Training should be hard, but a touch of liberality also makes it sustainable.
That's the thing. And who is Steve Prefontaine? Well, I suppose he's a mustachioed icon. The shorts I'm wearing that say "Stop Pre" on them were a mischievous response to people simply saying go pre, if I'm not mistaken. It's a funny thing, the University of Oregon in the 1970s, Bill Bowerman, who was the coach of that team, who went on to be essentially a co-founder of Nike. He was a guy who was essentially the pioneer of running shoe technology in North America. We talk about like waffle soles. He would actually have like waffle irons that he would like impress into soles. And very few people are both engineers and artists of the human soul, but I guess he was one of those rare Da Vinci type souls who could master like a lot of different ways of shaping excellence.